We're going to move right on to one of my favorite people, wonderful woman who has been in the industry for many decades and has been an amazing mentor to me also. Ladies and gentlemen, please, I'd like to welcome Miss Denise Ford.
Wow, thank you, Carline, for that. It's my great pleasure to be here with all of you on behalf of American Writers and Artists Institute, which is where not just I learned lessons from Clayton, but so many people did. But before I begin, I got to tell you, that prequel, that tribute you just did was beyond awesome. The photos, the music, it was really lovely, and it put me in a great space in my heart. So thank you for that. And I also love seeing photos of a lot of people who are speaking today. I bet you were shocked to see yourselves in some of them. But it's so lovely to have those memories. So who was Clayton to me? Clayton was a unique human being. I first met him when I invited him to speak at one of our early boot camps back in 2006. And in addition to working together, one of the things I most remember about him is all the times we got to talk to him or laugh with him, Clayton and Wendy, on many occasions at those boot camps and on several social events too. He was an industry and the legend back then, and obviously now. He was tireless in his devotion to the work that we asked him to do. He also was a tiny bit crazy when I met him. But that's nothing new because I think he lived near the edge. He worked on the edge. I remember one boot camp when he and Don Mahoney, one of the founders of American Writers, they were in the hall talking about something and they were very animated. So I went up to see them and they were talking motorcycles. It must have been Harleys, I think. But they each had photos with their bikes and they were showing them to each other with as much affection as they did when they showed photos of their family. It was hysterical to me. I loved that. Clayton Makepeace was a treasured speaker at all AWAI events for many, many years. And he never missed an invitation to speak at these events because he loved being with people. He loved teaching. You said that so well. And he was so a teacher mentor, which is not necessarily the same thing and certainly not common. And he wasn't satisfied just to be a masterful copywriter. He wanted other people to succeed, to have that same success. That photo of you, Carline, as a kid at that table. I mean, maybe you weren't a kid. You look like a kid to me. And he took you on, he took you on and mentored you. That's just so indicative, I think, of his spirit. I think Clayton not only shared his professional skills, which, like all of us, develop over time. He shared his knowledge and his expertise about the industry, about how it worked, about the importance of working with graphics. And I know Laurie has great stories about that. He understood the whole big picture and he relished in teaching the little details. One of the things I remember most about him is the enthusiasm he exhibited when he was teaching or talking about a certain bullet point in his presentation. He also had a remarkable curiosity and interest in learning from fellow writers and masters. I mean, the way he spoke of you, Richard, and you, Gary, when we couldn't have you at Boot Camp, but the way he spoke of you with not just esteem, but with respect. And it was respect related to the volume of your work, and I think his relationship to you individually. And that's something I think we all take away from him. It isn't just the work, it's our relationship to it and to others. There are so many lessons that I'm sure we're going to hear about today, but I'd like to share just a few from members of the AWAI community, if I might. Katie Yackel, as many of you know, is the executive director for American Writers, and she brought Clayton into the AWAI family years ago, maybe 20 years ago. And she's shared different stories of how Clayton was not only a good teacher, but he was a friend and mentor to her and Rebecca Matter, in that slideshow, if you recall, there's a photo of Clayton and Wendy sitting in the bookstore with Katie and Rebecca. That was typical of what he would do, even when he was, he was going to go speak or he just spoke, but that his presence, he was always present. And Katie said she doesn't think she was ever on a webinar with Clayton that lasted less than 2 hours because he wanted to be sure every question was answered. He was the ultimate champion of up-and-coming writers. That's true. Back then, I think I was running the webinars and I kept looking at my watch. He just was determined to make sure that the answer merited the question. Paul Hollingshead, who's also one of the founders of AWAI, he said that Clayton is such a giant in our industry and a most gentle giant at that. And that bespeaks a quality of Clayton I think we all can recognize. Paul said, the first time I met Clayton, he didn't know me from Adam. It was at boot camp. I was nervous as hell, but it took him 1 second to make me feel like we had been friends for years. He just reached out his hand, leaned in, and suddenly I was the most important person in the room at that moment. And the funny thing is, Paul said, I felt that way with Clayton, whether we were one-on-one in person or watching him share his secrets from the stage, which he loved to do. Many of the writers that have been part of AWAI over the years remember Clayton from these events, and most of them remember him as someone who changed their lives. Pam Foster remembers Clayton as someone who had a genuine interest in nurturing the careers of others. Sean McCool tells a story that at his first boot camp, when he was deciding if copywriting was legit, there are many people, I'm sure in your experience, who don't think it is legitimate until they understand what it is and how it's done. So Sean came with that sort of attitude to that first boot camp. And he said Clayton's keynote speech sold him on the validity of this career and on the people that he had met at that event. That's pretty powerful. And he goes on to say it's changed his life forever. Chris Alsop won a coveted bootcamp spec assignment that AWAI was offering. And this one was to work with Clayton. And she says, when you are working with Clayton, you never, ever doubt that he believes in you. But one of the best stories I heard about Clayton came from Larry Owen. Larry wrote in to say that he met Clayton at Will's Honkey Tonk bar in Sarasota, Florida. Wendy, I've never been there, but I'm sure it's just as it sounds. Larry says it was an edgy biker bar that was full of Harleys and leather patch jackets and all the accompanying kinds of riders. Larry said, we were among those badass wannabes, affectionately known as the Rolex Bikers. While downing a bud, I overheard Clayton say, copywriter. Now that's an odd word to hear at Will's. So I turned to him and said something like, so you're a copywriter, huh? What do you write? What do you do? Clayton turned to me and said, I write junk mail. So Will said, hey, I have a small ad agency. Perhaps I can give you some work. Clayton, looking me over, said, maybe I can give you some work. I'm booked for 6 months. Now, one of the lessons that Clayton taught me, or that I think many of us recognize, is that we don't have to be the same to share those things that are the same in us. In other words, our differences are not as important necessarily as our similarities, but sharing our differences is important if we do it in a respectful way. Age has the wonderful ability of helping us do that over time. Clayton and I didn't always see the world through the same lens, but our differences were part of what we recognized in each other and to the large degree respected in each other. And the most important and valuable thing I really take away from Clayton is that we never let that separate what we had in common, ever. That's not something we say a lot these days. Clayton and I shared a love of being outside. I'm in the garden, he's on his bike, perhaps. Of music, we both loved music. He was far more rock and roll than I am, but music. He loved his family and Wendy, of course. He loved their life together, all the trips and the renovations to the house, and they were always doing something. And like a good writer, he loved language. He loved its power, its clarity, its ability to take the reader on a journey. Clearly, he did that as a copywriter and made a lot of money. I remember one dinner, one of those wonderful little social events. There were a couple of photos in there. And there were a group of speakers at the table. Wendy and Clayton were there, and the talk turned to poetry. Now, music was far more often Clayton's muse, but we both shared this appreciation for words. And at one point, perhaps after too much wine, I was trying to recite one of Mary Oliver's poems that I was smitten with at the time. And I couldn't remember it exactly, but I stumbled through. Clayton was attentive and gracious as he listened. And then he responded in such a simple way. It made me feel that what I said was even better. And he was able to thread the thought of that poem into the conversation we were having at the table. That's an amazement. Part of that poem, I'll just share 2 or 3 lines because it speaks to me about he's gone, but baby, he ain't gone. He's so living in so many people. Mary Oliver, who I still continue to adore, has a poem, and part of it says, when it's over, I want to say to all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I've made of my life something particular and real. Well, to me, he made of his life more than something particular and real. And he was married to amazement, and he gifted us with his presence. And no matter who you are or what you do or what you believe, Clayton taught being gracious and kind will take you far with your talents. Thank you.
That was beautiful, Denise. Thank you so much. I respect and relationship. When you talked about those 2 things, that is exactly what Clayton was about. Anybody he talked to was important. At that moment he was talking to them, you were the most important person to him. I love that about him, that respect that he gave to everyone came through, and the fact that he worked on relationships that lasted many, many years, especially in the business. That's been amazing. I do want to make one clarification. I love the compliment. Thank you so much. But that young girl you said was next to Clayton was actually Tiara.
Okay. Because boy, you looked young, honey.
I was really young. Yeah, I was 15, right? Because that's how old she was.
Well, see, like, it paid off, Tiara. It paid off, honey.
I just didn't want, I said, I'll take that compliment, but I better be honest about it. But thank you so much. But that's one of my favorite pictures with my kids with Clayton too.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Denise. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.